Well, Silverstone was the very first race of the Group C era, a new fuel-based formula that opened the doors to all comers. The first car we pick up is Ray Mallock, driving a car which he raced in period at Le Mans. This is Nimrod chassis 005. He raced this car at Le Mans in 1984, sharing with Drake Olsen. But the car, unfortunately, not while Ray was driving it, but in the night, was written off in a big accident on the Mulsanne Straight, which claimed both the Aston Martin engined Nimrods, Viscount Down and the Aston Martin team combined to produce the car. And John Sheldon, I believe, was one of the drivers of the two cars. John Sheldon, Drake Olsen came together, and it wasn't just bad news for the Aston team. In the tragedy, a marshal lost his life, and RML, Ray Mallock's company, presents the ACO Marshals Award every year, which is named in memory of that marshal, Jackie Loiseau. So Ray, absolutely thrilled to be back driving this car. And of course, RML, not only instrumental in helping to build this car and the MCA Astons that followed, but they built their own Group C2 cars as well. They built Group C2 cars for the Ecos team, which were very successful in period. There are no Group C2 cars in this demonstration. We did see a C2 car racing earlier on in the Thundersports though, so we could perhaps see some more of those. There are certainly a lot of those around. Now, Ray enjoying getting back behind the wheel of this car. Let's hope he gets that Aston Martin thundering away quickly behind him, because going past us, a whole host of very quickly pedalled Porsches. Derek Bell drove one of the Rothmans cars that he drove in period yesterday, but he is in the Richard Lloyd Engineering cabin liveried car. Here he is, and this car, a 1988-89 car. Now, these cars were redesigned by Nigel Stroud. Most people, as you heard from Dickie Meaden, would buy their 956, 962 and be literally handed the ignition key, because like road car Porsches, race car Porsches do genuinely start on the key. But GTI Engineering, Richard Lloyd company, was not content with that. They always were redesigning the cars. They were first to build the cars from a composite honeycomb monocoque upwards, whereas the factory cars came from folded aluminium. And Derek Bell and James Weaver had the lead car in the team in 1988. They finished in the top 3 in the championship in the final race of the season. And Derek Bell with Tiffany Dell raced in the World Endurance Championship season as well with the cars in 1989, taking second in the Supercar race here at Silverstone and 4th at the year-ending race in Mexico. So Richard Lloyd Racing, one of the things that Richard Lloyd did with GTI Engineering was find some really very esoteric liveries. You'll see another one, the bright pink car with Japanese script that you can see running around, car number 14. That's another GTI Engineering car, and that was driven by David Hobbs, the great David Hobbs, the great raconteur David Hobbs, a young single-seater race called Stephen Ansgar, who converted to GT cars during the Group C era. There it is, the pink car. And one Damon Hill was the third driver of that car at Le Mans in 1989. So another GTI Engineering car. The car was also raced in 1989 with Manuel Reuter joining James Weaver in the team. And again, you can see it's got that short sprint tail with a separate wing. Very different from the look of the cars behind it. And then immediately behind, a car that is so evocative, so recognisable to British fans, the Silk Cut Jag. This particular car, an XJR8, featuring the 5-litre V12, and the engine was literally the same block that was used in V12 Jaguar XJs and XJSs. They were left out to weather for 6 to 12 months, and then they were built up to race engines, but it was absolutely a production block with a dry sump and so on to lower it, and very well tuned. But as Alex Brundle was telling Ed earlier, it's a car driven in 1987 to the Drivers' World Championship title by Raul Boesel and his teammates. Well, Raul was the sole Drivers' Champion in 1987, solo, ahead of Jan Lammers and John Watson, who were also driving Silk Cut Jags. Of course, Jaguar winning at Le Mans, going back with the XJR6 and then winning with the XJR8s. So hugely successful period for Jaguar in racing. Again, it was one that really reignited British interest at Le Mans more than ever. Le Mans is always one of Britain's biggest motor races, has perhaps the biggest British crowd, well, certainly up until this year, of any race other than the British Grand Prix here at Silverstone, when we had an absolute record crowd. And of course, Lewis Hamilton so instrumental in bringing all the fans to Silverstone, while Jaguar did the same. There was a real cup final feeling when Jaguar came to the line in 1988 to win Le Mans for the first time since the Curia-Cost days of the 1950s. Final month in office of Jaguar chairman John Egan, and he was as happy as anybody in the place. Now, behind the pink Richard Lloyd car, another very well-known livery. Didn't last long in Group C, the Skull Bandit livery, the J. David team. This car being driven by Mike Wilds, and actually here signing copies of his book this weekend, one of the men who drove it in period, John Fitzpatrick. John Fitzpatrick and Derek Warwick's perhaps best day in a Skull Bandit Porsche was at the 1,000 kilometres in Brands Hatch, where they won. And all the major teams were there. The factory Rothmans Porsche teams were there, GTI Engineering were there, Jost, Kramer, Obermeier, all the big teams that ran Porsches in the Group C era. And for the J. David team to come out on top was a massive day. A big result with two British drivers in the car. Very distinct livery. Now the other car with the white and blue striped livery that is on display, also the same team, but that car a 956 a little earlier. This is chassis number 114 for Anorax. Chassis number 110 is the blue car. So they certainly built a few of these cars. Now, car number 1, that is the car that Derek Bell, that Callum Lockie rather, drove yesterday. And again, as he said, great thanks to Henry Pearman, the arch enthusiast who first went to Le Mans in 1984 and who has a massive toy box. He's got more real Porsche 956, 962s than most people would have in a Scalextric collection. So he really does have a phenomenal array of these cars. This is car number 1 that you're seeing, chassis number 4 of the line of 962s. One of 3 works cars built for the model's debut in 1985 and raced at Le Mans with John Watson, who again is here this weekend, Al Holbert and Vern Chupin. They were previous winners of the race with Hurley Hayward in the 956 era. And they spent about half the race in this car with Watty in second place before the engine let go. The car then came back to Le Mans in 1986 and claimed pole, raced by the Yost team in Rothmans colours for Derek Bell and Hans Stuck in 1987. And a brief glimpse of the Kouros Mercedes. This team, the car designed and built by Peter Sauber and his crew, running Mercedes V8 engines, so it wasn't a factory Mercedes car. Kouros, the male perfume, was the livery of the car. Very attractive livery. Raced in 1986 as a Sauber, raced at Le Mans and also won at the Nürburgring in 1986. Competed in privateer hands for 2 years and has been in the collection in Las Vegas, Nevada for much of the intervening couple of decades. Restored in the late 1920 teens and returned to racing in 2019. Now here is the other J. David car with the Newsweek and Skull Bandit livery. Winner of the winners of the Brands Hatch 1,000 kilometres in 1983, John Fitzpatrick and Derek Warwick. One of 2 original 956s to beat the factory team, and the only 956 to race and win in North America. Raced at Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin. It was second at Imola as well, and on the podium in the 1,000 kilometres here at Silverstone in 1984 for the final round owned by JFR. So it raced at Le Mans as well by the late Alain de Cadenet, who passed away earlier this month, and Chris Craft in 1984, who also has departed this world and restored to its fabulous and original livery. Always great to hear that flat six bark around the Silverstone circuit. Like Henry Pearman, my first Le Mans in the early 1980s, and as he said, I've been telling everybody all weekend, if you're going to go to Le Mans, if you're thinking about it, half thinking about it, go. As that fan that Ed interviewed in 2023, it's the centenary. But I do warn you, if you go once is never enough. It is highly addictive. One of the best descriptions of Le Mans I ever read was by a Belgian journalist, the great Paul Frère, who, as well as being a good writer about motorsport, also won Le Mans, yes, and finished third in a Formula One Ferrari in a Belgian Grand Prix on the old Spa-Francorchamps. So he was that good a driver. And his description of Le Mans, it's a week-long holiday with like-minded friends, at the end of which they hold the world's greatest motor race. And that remains very much the description of Le Mans to this day. Highly addictive and highly entertaining. And if you're in the campsites, possibly also highly alcoholic, but we won't talk about that. So final few moments on track for Derek Bell. Share the car that he drove in period for GTI Engineering. Derek Bell was always as much in demand then as he is now, and not just for his skills as a raconteur, but for his skills behind the wheel. And we talked a little bit yesterday about Alex Brundle driving a car that his dad raced. Well, Alex has also raced with his father at Spa. And of course, Derek raced with Justin Bell at Le Mans in the Harrods McLaren, and came within a few hours and one unfortunate, very small component failure of potentially winning the Le Mans 24 Hours as a father and son combination. Well, it didn't quite happen, but I'm sure those memories are as strong with Derek as they definitely are with Justin. So the car's heading into the pit lane. We have one more race still to go to round us out, and it will very possibly be headlights on for the pre-66 touring cars. Let's catch up with them in the assembly area. Ed is finding everything is knee-high to him, I imagine.
Thank you, Martin, that's very kind. Now, this is called the Transatlantic touring car race, but you can be forgiven for thinking that actually it's just an American touring car race, because on the front of the grid we've got Mustang. The one we're looking at here has got Steve Soper in, done a few races in his time, used to do some tin tops, he's quite handy. We do have one Cortina of Marcus Jewell up here, fantastic effort by him, and then behind Ford Falcon, American. Behind that, Ford Mustang, American, another Ford Mustang. Then we're into the Galaxies, the enormous Galaxies that we paced out yesterday. Let's take a walk down the assembly area as these cars go out. And it's all the big engine cars up the front, which isn't really a surprise, because Silverstone, it's all about the long straights and getting the speed down those straights. Now we're into the minis, the poor little minis that would be quite near the front if it was actually raining, but it's not. No rain forecast. So the minis are going to be hanging onto the coattails of the bigger cars. Plenty of Lotus Cortinas, and there's a couple of BMWs. There's still some Mustangs further back here. But really, if it's a transatlantic competition, I think it's safe to say that the Americans have won qualifying. But let's see what happens when the race begins. That's all from us in the assembly area.